I am Rufus, 34 years old, and I never thought my own father would replace me. We were inseparable after Mom left when I was 10. Then Evelyn entered our lives with her 3 kids. And suddenly, I became invisible. Family photos pushed me to the edges. Holiday traditions changed without my input. At Thanksgiving, watching Dad toast to my children, while looking only at my step-siblings, something inside me broke. I quietly walked away that night, never expecting how dramatically things would change. Before I tell you about the day everything changed, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Growing up, it was just Dad and me against the world. When Mom walked out on us after their bitter divorce, I was only 10 years old, confused and heartbroken. Dad stepped up in ways I never expected from a man who worked 60-hour weeks at his construction company. He learned to cook more than just burgers on the grill, figured out how to braid my hair for special occasions, even though his calloused fingers struggled with the delicate task, and never missed a single baseball game despite his exhausting schedule. We developed rituals and inside jokes that became the foundation of our relationship. Sunday mornings were sacred for our pancake breakfasts, where we would talk about everything and nothing. He would call me Roof the Tough whenever I needed encouragement, a nickname that always made me feel stronger. Through my teenage years, Dad remained single, focusing entirely on raising me and growing his business. He dated occasionally, but nothing serious ever materialized. "Got my hands full with you and the company, Roof," he would say with a wink. I knew he was sacrificing his personal life for my sake, and it created a special bond between us that I thought was unbreakable. After I graduated college and established myself as a marketing executive at a local firm, Dad finally started dating more seriously. I encouraged him wholeheartedly, wanting him to find happiness after dedicating so many years to me. "You've earned some happiness, Dad," I told him. "Time to think about yourself for once." He seemed grateful for my blessing, and for a while everything felt perfectly balanced. Then 4 years ago, Dad met Evelyn at a charity golf tournament. She was beautiful, charming, and worked as a pediatric nurse. Their connection was immediate and intense. Within 6 months they were engaged, and 3 months after that married. The whirlwind romance caught me by surprise. But I was genuinely happy for Dad. At their wedding, I gave a heartfelt toast about how Dad deserved this new chapter of joy. Evelyn came with 3 children from her previous marriage. Amanda, 16 at the time, Tyler, 14, and Bailey, 12. They were polite, but reserved around me during our initial meetings. I made earnest efforts to connect with them, bringing thoughtful gifts and trying to find common interests. Amanda shared my love for photography, so I gifted her a professional camera for Christmas. Tyler was into video games, so we would occasionally play together, though conversations remained stilted. Bailey, the youngest, was the most receptive, often asking me questions about my job and life. The first year of their marriage seemed promising. Our blended family had awkward moments, but there was a sense of everyone trying. Dad still made time for our pancake Sundays, though occasionally Evelyn and her kids would join, altering the intimate atmosphere we once shared. I adjusted, understanding that compromise was necessary for this new family dynamic. The subtle changes began almost imperceptibly. First, it was Dad forgetting our standing monthly dinner date. "Sorry, Roof, Evelyn planned a family movie night," he explained over the phone, not noticing the irony of his words. Family. Wasn't I family too? Then came my 31st birthday. Dad had never forgotten my birthday before, not once in all my life. But that year, my phone remained silent. When I called him the next day, his voice filled with genuine horror. "Rufus, I completely forgot. We were preparing for Tyler's science fair and it slipped my mind." The explanation was reasonable, but the hurt cut deep. I assured him it was fine, that I understood, but something fundamental had shifted. As months passed, patterns emerged that became impossible to ignore. Dad would enthusiastically attend every soccer game, school play, and art show for Evelyn's children, posting proud pictures on social media with captions like, "So proud of my amazing kids." Yet, when I received a significant promotion at work, his congratulations felt perfunctory and afterthought. Our once sacred pancake Sundays disappeared, entirely replaced by brunches at Evelyn's preferred restaurants. where conversations revolved around her children's activities. When I would try to share news about my life, Dad would listen briefly before shifting attention back to Amanda's college applications or Tyler's baseball statistics. Holiday celebrations transformed too. Our traditional Christmas morning ritual of opening one gift at midnight while drinking hot chocolate gave way to Evelyn's family tradition of a formal Christmas Eve dinner. When I brought our old tradition up, Dad looked at me with slight embarrassment. "We need to create new traditions that work for everyone. Rufus," he said, not realizing that everyone increasingly excluded me. I tried multiple times to speak with Dad privately about how I was feeling, but timing never seemed right. "Not now, Roof. We're helping Amanda with college essays," or "Can we talk later? Bailey has a dance recital tonight." Later never came. I watched as the man who once centered his world around me gradually shifted his orbit to Evelyn and her children, while I drifted further into the periphery of his attention. The dad who never missed a single baseball game of mine now regularly forgot our plans. The man who worked extra shifts to help pay for my college education now spoke enthusiastically about saving for his stepchildren's futures without acknowledging the student loan debt I still carried. Despite these painful realizations, I continued showing up, bringing thoughtful gifts, asking interested questions about everyone's lives, and swallowing the hurt when conversations rarely turned to mine. I told myself that Dad deserved this happiness, this ready-made family that filled his empty nest. But with each gathering, the knot in my stomach grew tighter, and the smile I forced grew more strained. By the third year of their marriage, I had become a visitor in the family I once belonged to, knocking politely at the edges of their circle, hoping to be invited in. The pattern of being gradually erased from my own family intensified during the third year of Dad and Evelyn's marriage. What began as occasional oversights evolved into a consistent reality that became impossible to rationalize away. At Easter dinner that spring, I arrived early to help Dad prepare the traditional ham we always made together. It was one of the few cooking skills he had mastered before Evelyn, and we had perfected our honey glaze recipe over years of trial and error. When I walked into the kitchen, Evelyn was already directing the food preparation, and Dad informed me they were trying her family recipe this year. "Tyler is helping me with this one, Roof." "Why don't you set the table?" Dad suggested, not noticing how his casual dismissal stung. I watched from the dining room as he and Tyler laughed together, recreating the very dynamic Dad and I once shared. During that same gathering, Dad proudly announced that Amanda had been accepted to Princeton with a partial scholarship. Everyone applauded, and Dad teared up, saying, "I always dreamed of having a child go to an Ivy League school." The comment sliced through me. He had been equally proud when I got into State University, but now it seemed my accomplishment had been retroactively diminished. The following month, I closed a major marketing account that significantly advanced my career. When I called Dad to share the news, he listened for approximately 30 seconds before interrupting. "That's great, Rufus. Hey, did I tell you Bailey won first place in her piano competition? Let me put her on so she can tell you about it." My news was swept aside, never to be revisited. Family photographs began telling their own painful story. At Tyler's graduation party, Dad insisted on dozens of family photos. In each one, I was positioned on the outer edge, sometimes literally asked to move over a bit by Evelyn, as she centered her children next to Dad. When the photos were posted online, Dad's caption read, "The proudest day with my amazing family yet." In 3 of the 5 photos posted, I had been cropped out entirely. Summer brought the annual family trip to Lake Michigan, a tradition Dad and I had maintained even during the leanest financial years. This year, without consulting me, the destination changed to Florida, because, as Evelyn explained, the kids have always wanted to visit Disney World. When I mentioned the change breaking our lake house tradition, Dad looked genuinely confused. "We can go to the lake another time. Just you and me," he promised. That private trip never materialized despite my gentle reminders. The 4th of July barbecue at their house became another milestone in my growing invisibility. Dad had always prided himself on his grilling skills, another father-son activity we had shared. This year, he announced that Tyler was taking over grilling duties because he needs to learn these things as the man of the house while I am away on business trips. The casual designation of Tyler as the man of the house in my presence revealed how completely Dad had reconstructed his concept of family with me outside of it. In August, I experienced a difficult breakup with my girlfriend of 2 years. When I called Dad for support, he listened briefly before saying, "You will bounce back, Roof the Tough. Listen, can I call you later? We are taking the kids shopping for back to school." The nickname that once signified our special bond now felt hollow, deployed as a quick comfort before dismissing me for his new priorities. Fall brought college application season for Amanda. Dad canceled our plans 3 consecutive times because Amanda needs help with her essays, or we are visiting campuses this weekend. When I pointed out that we had barely seen each other in months, Dad sighed with clear irritation. "You are an adult, Rufus. Amanda is at a critical point in her life and needs guidance." The implication was clear: my needs were less important because I was no longer a child requiring his active parenting. Throughout these months, I noticed Evelyn's subtle but consistent maneuvering. She rarely directly excluded me, maintaining plausible deniability, but would schedule family events when she knew I had standing work commitments. She would interrupt my conversations with Dad to redirect his attention to her children's needs or achievements. When I would bring gifts for the kids, she would sometimes comment, "You really shouldn't spend so much on them, Rufus. You need to save for your own family someday," effectively positioning me as an outsider obligated to her children rather than a brother figure. Dad's social media became another arena where my erasure was documented. His profile picture changed to one with Evelyn and her 3 children. His posts gushed about family game nights and proud parent moments to which I had not been invited. When friends or colleagues would comment, "Where is Rufus?" he would respond vaguely about my busy work schedule, never acknowledging that I simply hadn't been included. Halloween had always been a big deal for Dad and me. Even into my 20s, we maintained our tradition of carving elaborate pumpkins together the weekend before. This year I called to confirm our plans, only to discover they had already completed their pumpkin carving the previous day. "Bailey really wanted to do it early this year," Dad explained unapologetically. When I arrived on Halloween with candy for trick-or-treaters, I found the house transformed with decorations I had never seen, our traditional skeleton display replaced with Evelyn's preferred harvest theme. As Thanksgiving approached, I noticed Dad had not mentioned any plans with me. When I finally asked directly, he seemed surprised I would inquire. "We always spend Thanksgiving together, Dad," I reminded him. "Of course you are invited, Rufus," he said, as if extending a courtesy rather than confirming an unbreakable tradition. The framing of his response positioning me as a guest needing an invitation to a family holiday rather than an integral family member crystallized exactly how far I had fallen in priority. Throughout these months, I maintained a facade of understanding. I smiled through the hurt-made excuses for Dad's behavior to my friends and continued showing up despite feeling increasingly unwelcome. I told myself that blending families was challenging, that Dad was simply trying to bond with his stepchildren, that things would eventually balance out. But beneath my composed exterior, resentment and grief accumulated with each incident, each oversight, each replacement of our traditions with new ones that excluded me either literally or emotionally. I was being systematically erased from my own family narrative, watching as the most important relationship in my life was diminished to an occasional obligation. And still I continued to show up, hoping that my presence would eventually remind Dad of the bond we once shared. Thanksgiving had always held special significance for Dad and me. After Mom left, it became the holiday where we reinforced our team of 2, creating elaborate meals despite our limited culinary skills. As I drove to the lake house that Dad had purchased 5 years earlier, I felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. The lake house represented the culmination of our shared dreams, a place we had talked about owning since I was 12. We had spent countless weekends fishing off its small dock, grilling on the patio, and talking late into the night around the fire pit. It was our sanctuary. I had spent considerable time selecting thoughtful gifts for everyone. A leather-bound journal for Amanda to document her senior year. A limited edition controller for Tyler's gaming console, art supplies for Bailey, based on an interest she had recently mentioned, and for Dad and Evelyn, a custom photo album chronicling their relationship milestones. Despite my growing resentment, I wanted to make a genuine effort to connect with my blended family. Upon arrival, I immediately sensed something was different. The living room had been rearranged with family photos I had never seen displayed prominently. Our fishing trophies, once proudly exhibited on the mantel, were nowhere in sight. When I asked Dad about them, he shrugged dismissively. Evelyn thought they made the place look too cluttered. As more relatives arrived, Evelyn directed everyone to their seats for dinner. I was surprised to find my name card at what was clearly the kids' table separated from the main dining area. We needed to make room for Evelyn's parents at the adult table, Dad explained when he noticed my confusion. I was 34 years old, a successful marketing executive seated between Bailey and Evelyn's 12-year-old nephew. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Throughout dinner, I watched Dad beaming with pride as Tyler narrated a story about his baseball team. It mirrored so precisely the way Dad used to look at me when I shared my achievements that I felt a physical ache in my chest. When I attempted to join the main table conversation about marketing trends, Evelyn smoothly interrupted. "That sounds complicated, Rufus. Tyler, tell everyone about your science project." After the meal, Dad stood to offer a toast. Raising his glass, he looked around the table with glistening eyes. "I want to thank everyone for being here today, especially my beautiful wife." He smiled at Evelyn. "And to my children," he continued, his gaze moving directly to Amanda, Tyler, and Bailey, bypassing me entirely. "I am so proud of the amazing people you are becoming. Nothing makes me happier than our family." The word "our" hung in the air, its exclusionary boundary clearly drawn to omit me. Conversations continued around me, but I felt disconnected, observing from outside a family circle that once had me at its center. The real blow came after dessert when Dad announced he wanted to take a family portrait by the lake. As everyone gathered, I moved to stand beside him, as I always had in family photos. "Actually, Rufus," Evelyn interjected with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Could you stand on the end? We want the kids next to their dad." Their dad. Not our dad. Theirs. I complied silently, taking my assigned position on the periphery. As the photographer, Evelyn's brother, prepared to snap the picture, Dad suddenly frowned. "Rufus, would you mind stepping aside for this one? We want a photo with just the immediate family first." The request silenced the group momentarily. Immediate family. The distinction was unmistakable. I was no longer considered immediate family in my father's eyes. Wordlessly, I stepped away, watching as they smiled for the camera, a perfect nuclear family composition with no acknowledgement of the son who stood witness to his own erasure. They took several variations of the same photo, none including me, before Dad finally called, "Okay, Rufus, you can join for this last one." The final humiliation came after the photography session, when everyone gathered in the living room. Dad clinked his glass again for an announcement. With undisguised pride, he revealed he had established college funds for Amanda, Tyler, and Bailey. "Education is the greatest gift I can give my children," he declared. "I want to ensure they start adult life without the burden of student loans." The statement hit like a physical blow. 2 months earlier, I had asked Dad if he might help with the remaining $15,000 of my student loan debt, a request he had declined, citing financial constraints. Those same constraints had apparently not applied to the significantly larger commitment he had just announced for his stepchildren. When the room cleared somewhat, I pulled Dad aside, asking if we could speak privately. On the porch, overlooking the lake where we had shared so many conversations, I finally voiced what had been building for years. "Dad, I feel like I am being erased from this family." I began struggling to keep my voice steady. Today I was relegated to the kids' table, excluded from family photos. And then I had to listen to you announce college funds for your stepchildren after refusing to help with my student loans. Dad's expression hardened in a way I had rarely seen directed at me. "You need to grow up and stop being jealous of children, Rufus. They need me in ways you no longer should. You are a grown man with a career. Act like it." "This isn't about jealousy," I countered, feeling a rare anger rise. "This is about watching my father systematically replace me with his new family. We had traditions, connections, a relationship that seems to mean nothing now." "You are being dramatic," Dad dismissed. "People's lives change. Families evolve. Evelyn and I are building something here. And I need you to be supportive instead of demanding attention like a child." His characterization of my feelings as childish neediness rather than legitimate hurt left me speechless. Before I could formulate a response, Evelyn called for Dad to help with something inside, and he left me standing alone on the porch without a backward glance. Later that evening, needing some space to process, I went to my childhood bedroom where I had always stayed during lake house visits. Opening the door, I froze in disbelief. The room had been completely transformed into a game room, with my bed replaced by a pool table, my desk by a gaming station. Not a single trace remained of the space that had been mine. What hurt most wasn't just the conversion of the room, but that no one had thought to warn me. I had arrived with suitcase in hand, expecting to sleep in my usual space, only to discover I had been literally designed out of the home. When I asked Dad about sleeping arrangements, he casually mentioned I could use the pull-out sofa in the den just for tonight. Standing in the doorway of a room that had erased all evidence of my existence in this family, something broke inside me. Without confrontation or dramatic announcement, I quietly packed my suitcase, wrote a brief note, explaining I wasn't feeling well and would be heading home, and slipped out while everyone was engaged in a board game. As I drove away from the lake house that had once represented the bond between father and son, I realized I was driving away from more than just a disastrous Thanksgiving. I was leaving behind the illusion that I still held a meaningful place in my father's heart and family. The drive home from the lake house remains a blur in my memory. Radio off, phone silenced. I navigated the 3-hour journey in a state of emotional numbness. Decades of memories with Dad played through my mind like a movie montage, teaching me to ride a bike, cheering at my high school graduation, helping me move into my first apartment. How had we arrived at this point where I had become dispensable in his life? Upon reaching my apartment, I turned my phone back onto a barrage of notifications. 3 missed calls from Dad, several text messages demanding to know where I had gone, and even a voicemail from Evelyn expressing concern that was betrayed by her slightly irritated tone. I responded with a brief text. Made it home safely. Needed some space. We'll call tomorrow. Sleep evaded me that night. By morning, emotional exhaustion had given way to a strange clarity. I called Miguel, my best friend since college, who had witnessed the gradual deterioration of my relationship with Dad. Come over, Miguel insisted after hearing the condensed version of Thanksgiving. Sarah is making breakfast burritos, and you shouldn't be alone right now. Miguel and Sarah's apartment became my sanctuary that weekend. Their genuine concern contrasted sharply with the conditional attention I had grown accustomed to from my own family. As we sat on their balcony drinking coffee, Miguel voiced what I had been afraid to articulate. Rufus, this has been happening for years, he said gently. We have all seen it. Your dad has been systematically pushing you out of his life to make room for his new family. The question is, what are you going to do about it now? What indeed, Dad called repeatedly that day, his messages evolving from concerned to frustrated to angry. You embarrassed me by leaving without saying goodbye, he texted. Evelyn's parents think you are incredibly rude. No mention of my feelings or why I might have left. No acknowledgement of how I had been treated. Evelyn sent a message that particularly stung. Your father is heartbroken by your behavior. After everything he has sacrificed for you, this is how you repay him. By ruining our first Thanksgiving as a complete family at the lake house. The implication that the family was only complete in my absence revealed more than perhaps she intended. After 3 days of reflection, consultation with Miguel and Sarah, and numerous drafted responses deleted before sending, I called Dad. The conversation was brief and painfully revealing. I left because it became unbearably clear that I no longer have a place in your family, I explained, struggling to keep my voice even. That is ridiculous, Dad countered. You are always welcome at family gatherings. Welcome as what, though? A guest. Because that is how I was treated. Seated at the kids' table, excluded from family photos, discovering my room converted without warning. These aren't isolated incidents, Dad. They are part of a pattern where I am systematically being erased from your life. You are overreacting, Dad dismissed. Families change. Dynamics evolve. You need to be more adaptable. What hurts most, I continued, ignoring his minimization, is that you do not even seem aware of what you are doing. You announced college funds for Evelyn's children 2 months after telling me you couldn't help with my student loans. You call them your children while treating me like a distant relative. Dad's response was telling. They need me in ways you no longer do. You are an adult with your own life. Being an adult doesn't mean I stopped being your son. I replied, my voice finally breaking. The conversation ended with no resolution, only a wider gulf between us. Dad expected me at Christmas as usual, making no acknowledgement of my expressed hurt or his role in causing it. I made no promises. In the weeks that followed, I made two significant decisions. I started seeing a therapist specializing in family dynamics, and I informed Dad I would not be attending the family Christmas celebration. The therapy sessions were revelatory. Dr. Warner helped me recognize patterns of emotional neglect that I had normalized and internalized as my own failing. What you are describing is a common dynamic in blended families, she explained. But your father's inability to maintain multiple attachments isn't a reflection of your worth. Dad's reaction to my Christmas decision was predictably self-centered. You are punishing me for having a new family, he accused, during a tense phone call. Evelyn thinks you have never accepted her. This isn't about Evelyn, I clarified. This is about preserving my own mental health. I cannot continue pretending everything is fine when I am treated as an afterthought in a family where I was once central. Christmas Day was difficult but healing. Miguel and Sarah invited me to join their family gathering, where I was welcomed warmly and included meaningfully in their traditions. The contrast to my recent family experiences was both comforting and painful. As the new year began, I crafted a resolution focused on self-respect rather than reconciliation. I would no longer chase my father's attention or approval. I would no longer accept being treated as peripheral in my own family story. I would build connections with people who valued my presence rather than tolerated it. Dad's messages became less frequent as January progressed. When he did reach out, conversations remained superficial, neither of us willing to address the underlying fracture. Evelyn occasionally sent group texts about family events, which I politely declined with brief excuses about work commitments. The distance was painful but necessary. Each week in therapy helped strengthen my understanding that walking away wasn't about punishment or manipulation, but about self-preservation. Dr. Warner helped me see that sometimes creating space is the only way to gain perspective on unhealthy dynamics. By February, I had established new routines that filled the void left by family estrangement. Sunday brunches with friends replaced the pancake tradition. Weekly photography excursions with a local club gave me creative fulfillment. I joined a community service organization that provided mentoring to children from single-parent homes, finding healing and supporting kids, navigating situations I understood intimately. My chosen family expanded. Miguel and Sarah, of course, remained central. But I also grew closer to colleagues like Jennifer and Toby, who began including me in their weekend gatherings. My neighbor Carlos and his wife invited me to their family dinners, where their genuine interest in my life provided the validation I had sought from Dad. Family isn't always blood, Carlos told me one evening over homemade paella. Sometimes it is the people who make space for you at their table, without making you feel like you should be grateful for the seat. That simple wisdom crystallized what had been missing in my relationship with Dad and his new family. I had been expected to be grateful for inclusion that should have been automatic to fight for attention, that should have been freely given to prove my worthiness, for love that should have been unconditional. 3 months of minimal contact with Dad allowed me space to rebuild my sense of self-worth independent of his validation. I no longer reflexively checked my phone hoping for his call. I stopped mentally rehearsing conversations where I finally made him understand my perspective. I began to accept that while I could not change his behavior, I could change how much power it held over my happiness. The pain didn't disappear, but it transformed. What had been an acute stabbing hurt evolved into a dull ache that occasionally flared but no longer dominated my emotional landscape. I was healing one day at a time by walking away from the source of injury. I could not have anticipated how dramatically things would change with my next encounter with Dad, or how walking away would ultimately alter our relationship more profoundly than all my years of trying to be seen. 3 months and 17 days after the Thanksgiving disaster, my carefully constructed peace was interrupted by an unexpected knock at my door on a rainy Tuesday evening. Opening it revealed Dad soaked from the downpour, looking simultaneously authoritative and uncertain, a contradiction I had never observed in him before. "Can I come in?" he asked, his familiar voice jarring after our extended separation. The apartment I had once been eager to show off to him now felt like private territory being encroached upon. Nevertheless, I stepped aside watching as he surveyed the changes I had made. New artwork, rearranged furniture, visible signs of a life continuing in his absence. "You look good," he offered awkwardly, declining my perfunctory offer of coffee. The small talk quickly exhausted itself, leaving an uncomfortable silence that Dad finally broke with the real purpose of his visit. "The business is in trouble, Rufus," he stated bluntly. "We lost the Westfield contract and 3 major clients have switched to competitors. I hate to admit it, but I need your marketing expertise." The revelation struck me as both surprising and entirely predictable. Dad's construction company had been successful through hard work and personal relationships, but he had always resisted modernization, particularly in marketing and client acquisition. I had offered help numerous times over the years, suggestions he typically dismissed as unnecessary fancy business school ideas. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I questioned, maintaining emotional distance despite the flicker of old instincts to immediately leap to his aid. Dad explained the situation in greater detail. The company was facing its worst financial quarter in 15 years. Newer competitors with digital presence and sophisticated branding were siphoning clients. Traditional word-of-mouth referrals had dried up in an increasingly online marketplace. "I need a complete marketing overhaul," he admitted. "Website, social media, client presentations, everything. No one knows this industry and my company better than you do." The request presented a complex emotional equation. Here was Dad acknowledging my professional value, while simultaneously confirming my suspicion that I now mattered primarily for what I could contribute, rather than who I was. The son had become a potential service provider. "I will need to think about it." I responded, surprising both of us with my lack of immediate agreement. The old Rufus would have jumped at this chance to be needed by Dad again. The new Rufus recognized the potential for reopening barely healed wounds. After Dad left, I called Dr. Warner and scheduled an emergency session. "This is an opportunity to establish new boundaries," she advised during our meeting the following morning. "You can engage professionally while maintaining emotional distance. The question is whether you can separate these aspects effectively." That evening, I called Miguel for additional perspective. "He only reached out because he needs something," Miguel pointed out, protective anger evident in his voice. "Where was this urgency to connect when you were hurting?" "That is true," I acknowledged. "But it also might be the only opening I will get to shift our dynamic. If I can establish value on my terms, maybe things can be different." After 2 days of consideration, I called Dad with my decision. "I will help with the business," I stated, "but with conditions. This will be a professional arrangement with clear boundaries. I will create a marketing strategy and implementation plan as a consultant, not as a favor. And my involvement with the business does not automatically translate to resuming our previous family dynamic." Dad's momentary silence suggested this conditional acceptance wasn't what he had expected. Eventually, he agreed, his tone conveying both relief and confusion at my business-like approach. The following weekend, I visited the company office for the first time in nearly a year. The familiar space held memories of summers working alongside Dad, learning the business from the ground up. Now I entered as a marketing consultant, rather than a son, laptop, and portfolio in hand, instead of a lunch packed by Dad. Our initial meeting was awkward but productive. I interviewed Dad about current clients, competitors, and company strengths. We reviewed financial documents and market position. Throughout, I maintained professional detachment, focusing on business problems rather than the personal elephant in the room. As weeks passed, I implemented a comprehensive marketing strategy. I redesigned the outdated website, established social media presence, created compelling presentation materials, and developed targeted advertising campaigns. The work itself was fulfilling, allowing me to apply my expertise to a business I genuinely cared about despite the complicated emotions attached to it. Dad's reaction to my professional competence evolved from surprise to genuine respect. "These client presentations are remarkable," he admitted after we secured a major new contract. "I underestimated how much the industry has changed." Our working relationship gradually found its rhythm with weekly strategy meetings and regular email updates. Strictly business, no personal discussions, exactly as I had stipulated. Yet beneath this professional veneer, undercurrents of our unresolved personal relationship occasionally surfaced in small moments. Dad automatically pouring my coffee exactly how I liked it, or me unconsciously using our old shorthand for certain clients. 1 month into our arrangement, Dad invited me to dinner at his house to discuss a potential new client. I declined politely, but firmly. Let us keep our meetings at the office or neutral locations, I suggested, unwilling to re-enter the family space where my replacement had been so painfully evident. Dad seemed genuinely confused by my resistance. Evelyn has been asking about you, he said. The kids, too. I'm not ready for that, I responded simply. The boundary held. As the business began to stabilize under the new marketing direction, I observed subtle changes in Dad's demeanor toward me. The dismissive attitude that had characterized our recent years gave way to attentive listening during business discussions. He began soliciting my opinion on matters beyond marketing, acknowledging my broader understanding of the construction industry I had absorbed throughout my life. This newfound professional respect created an unexpected bridge across the chasm of our personal estrangement. Dad began sharing business anecdotes that occasionally veered into more personal territory. I maintained my emotional boundaries while allowing these small openings. 6 weeks into our professional collaboration, the family dynamics I had carefully avoided collided with our business arrangement. I arrived at the office to find Tyler using the conference room for homework. His presence was jarring, this stepbrother I had not seen since Thanksgiving now occupying a space that had become my professional territory. Dad said I could study here after school, he explained awkwardly. Mom has a double shift at the hospital. Rather than retreating, I made a deliberate choice to engage. How is school going? I asked, setting up my laptop at the opposite end of the conference table. Tyler's initial monosyllabic responses gradually expanded into actual conversation. He was struggling with a marketing project for his business class, a coincidence that provided neutral ground for connection. I offered suggestions showing him examples from campaigns I had created. You are really good at this stuff, he observed with genuine admiration. Dad says the company would have gone under without your help. The casual revelation that Dad acknowledged my contribution to others, perhaps even praised me in my absence, shifted something in my perception of our situation. When Dad arrived and found us working together, his surprise was evident, as was something else. Something that looked remarkably like hope. Tyler has a good eye for design, I commented professionally. He made some solid suggestions for the Anderson proposal. That brief interaction with Tyler represented the first crack in the wall I had built between my professional and family relationships. The following week, Amanda stopped by the office to discuss college options, her previous coldness replaced by tentative friendliness. Dad says, you know a lot about marketing programs, she explained. I am considering it as a major. These encounters with my step-siblings revealed nuances I had missed during my years of feeling replaced. They had been navigating their own complex emotions about blending families, perhaps receiving messages from Evelyn about their role in Dad's new life that created unintended competition. Dad observed these interactions with visible relief, clearly interpreting them as steps toward family reconciliation. I maintained my professional boundaries, while allowing these small personal connections to develop organically. 8 weeks into our arrangement, the business had stabilized enough that my intensive involvement was no longer necessary. I prepared a transition plan to shift daily marketing operations to an internal team member we had hired, with my role reducing to monthly consultations. When I presented this plan to Dad, his panic was palpable. We still need you involved regularly, he insisted, though. The business metrics clearly indicated otherwise. The company is on solid footing now, I countered. Madison is fully trained on the systems we have implemented. My continued heavy involvement would be redundant. What Dad said next revealed the true nature of his concern. If you step back from the business, I am afraid I will lose you again. The admission hung between us raw and honest, in a way our interactions had not been for years. The business had become the bridge, reconnecting us, and Dad feared its removal would sever our tenuous new connection. My reduced role in the business doesn't have to mean reduced contact, I offered carefully. But any personal relationship moving forward needs to be built on different terms than before. Dad nodded understanding, dawning that our reconciliation would require more than shared business interests. It would demand acknowledgement of past hurts and genuine change, not simply a return to surface-level involvement. As I prepared to transition to my reduced role, I realized that walking away from Thanksgiving dinner had set in motion a profound shift. By removing myself from a painful situation, I had created space for something potentially healthier to emerge. Though the full transformation would require confronting truths that had long been avoided by everyone involved. 3 months of working together had stabilized Dad's business. The new marketing strategies had attracted fresh clients, modernized the company's image, and created sustainable systems that would continue functioning with minimal oversight from me. My professional contribution had earned genuine respect from Dad, establishing a new foundation for our relationship based on adult mutual value rather than parent-child dynamics. To mark this business milestone in my transition to a reduced consulting role, Dad suggested a team dinner at Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant. The whole family wants to celebrate your success with the company, he explained clearly, including his wife and stepchildren in that designation. After careful consideration and consultation with Dr. Warner, I agreed to this dinner, recognizing it as an inevitable step in our evolving relationship. This would be my first social interaction with the entire family since walking away at Thanksgiving nearly 7 months earlier. Romano's private dining room provided a neutral setting, neither Dad's territory nor mine. I arrived precisely on time to find everyone already seated, Dad at the head of the table. Evelyn beside him, Amanda, Tyler, and Bailey arranged around them. The empty chair clearly designated for me sat opposite Dad, physically positioning me as counterpoint rather than afterthought. Initial conversations centered safely on business achievements. Dad proudly described how my marketing initiatives had reversed the company's declining fortunes. Rufus single-handedly modernized our approach, he told the table. The Anderson contract alone covered our operational costs for the quarter. The praise felt validating, yet strange public acknowledgement of value that had been absent in private for so long. Evelyn smiled tightly, contributing occasional questions about marketing strategies that revealed both genuine interest and subtle discomfort with my newly elevated status in Dad's estimation. The dynamic shift became increasingly apparent as dinner progressed. Dad repeatedly solicited my opinions not just on business matters, but on Amanda's college considerations and Tyler's summer job prospects. My input was suddenly valued in family decisions where I had previously been excluded. This attention clearly disoriented Evelyn, whose subtle attempts to redirect conversations became more pronounced as the evening continued. When Dad asked my thoughts on Amanda's photography portfolio, Evelyn interjected before I could respond. "I think we should focus on celebrating the business tonight," she suggested with forced brightness. "Family matters can wait for family time." The distinction hung heavily in the air. Family time, a category from which I had been systematically excluded. Tyler surprisingly challenged his mother's demarcation. "Rufus is family," he stated simply with teenage bluntness. "And he knows more about photography than any of us." The table fell momentarily silent. Bailey, who had been quiet throughout dinner, suddenly spoke up. "Is that why you stopped coming over?" "Because Mom kept saying you weren't really part of our family." Evelyn's sharp intake of breath and Dad's widened eyes confirmed that Bailey's innocent question had exposed something significant. Amanda studied her water glass, intently avoiding eye contact with everyone. "Bailey, that is enough," Evelyn warned, her composed facade cracking slightly. "But you did say that Bailey persisted with a child's commitment to literal truth. You told us Rufus was Dad's grown-up son, who had his own life, and wasn't really part of our new family. You said we were Dad's real family now." The restaurant's ambient noise suddenly seemed very loud in the silence that followed this revelation. Dad looked between his wife and youngest stepdaughter with dawning comprehension. "Perhaps this isn't the appropriate setting for this discussion," I suggested, trying to diffuse the tension for Bailey's sake. "No," Dad countered firmly. "I think it is exactly the right setting. Neutral ground, where everyone needs to maintain civility." He turned to Bailey. "What else did Evelyn say about Rufus?" Evelyn attempted to interrupt, but Dad silenced her with an uncharacteristically stern glance. Bailey, unaware of the magnitude of what she was revealing, continued matter-of-factly. She said we shouldn't get too attached to Rufus because he would probably stop visiting once he got married and had his own kids, and that we were Dad's priority now because we still needed raising, but Rufus was already raised. Each word illuminated the intentional architecture of my exclusion in a way I had sensed but couldn't previously confirm. Evelyn had been actively constructing a narrative that positioned me outside the family circle, not merely benefiting from circumstantial distance. Amanda, still studying her water glass, finally spoke. She told us to make sure we got Dad's attention whenever you were around, she admitted quietly. She said you had him to yourself for years, and now it was our turn. Tyler nodded in confirmation. That is why I always brought up school stuff when you visited. Mom would remind us before you arrived to make sure Dad focused on us. These revelations transformed my understanding of the family dynamic. What I had experienced as Dad's willing replacement of me had been at least partially an orchestrated campaign by Evelyn to secure her children's position by minimizing mine. Dad's expression shifted from shock to dawning anger as these pieces fell into place. Is this true? He demanded, turning to Evelyn. Have you been deliberately pushing Rufus out of our family? Evelyn's composure finally broke completely. What was I supposed to do? She countered defensively. You were constantly comparing my children to your perfect son. Rufus made honor roll every semester. Rufus never gave me trouble as a teenager. They could never measure up to St. Rufus. Her outburst revealed insecurities I had never suspected beneath her seemingly confident exterior. In her mind, I had represented an impossible standard, against which her children were judged and found wanting. So you deliberately undermined my relationship with my son. Dad's voice had gone dangerously quiet. I was protecting my children, Evelyn insisted. They deserved a father who wasn't always looking over their shoulders at his adult son's accomplishments. They needed to feel secure in their place with you. By erasing Rufus, Dad questioned incredulously. By creating space for them to develop their own relationship with you without living in his shadow, Evelyn countered. I listened to this exchange with surprising emotional detachment, the months of therapy allowing me to recognize this was fundamentally about Evelyn's insecurities rather than my worthiness. Still, one question demanded answering. Did Dad know what you were doing? I asked her directly. Before Evelyn could respond, Amanda answered for her. She told us not to tell Dad about the make sure you get attention conversations. She said he wouldn't understand. Dad absorbed this information with visible distress. All those times you conveniently scheduled family activities when Rufus was working or suggested we start new traditions, different from our old ones. You were systematically cutting him out. Evelyn's silence confirmed his suspicion. The kids' table at Thanksgiving, he pressed. The family photos where Rufus was pushed aside, converting his room without telling him. Those were deliberate choices. I was building our family, Evelyn maintained. Though her certainty seemed to waver. Rufus is an adult, with his own life. My children needed you more. They were not mutually exclusive, Dad stated flatly. I could have been fully present for your children without diminishing my relationship with my son. The conversation had reached a critical juncture. Evelyn, realizing her position was increasingly indefensible, resorted to ultimatum. If you were going to blame me for problems that already existed in your relationship with Rufus, perhaps we should continue this discussion at home. She stood gathering her purse. Children, we are leaving. None of the three teenagers moved. I want to hear what Rufus has to say, Tyler stated firmly. We have only ever heard Mom's version of everything. Bailey nodded in agreement. Amanda looked torn but remained seated. Evelyn's ultimatum had backfired, revealing the limits of her control over the narrative she had constructed. Fine, she said tightly, returning to her seat. Let us hear what Rufus has to say. All eyes turned to me. In that moment, I recognized the power and responsibility of the platform I had been given. I could deepen the fractures now evident in this family, or I could offer a perspective that might ultimately lead to healing for everyone, including myself. What happened between Dad and me wasn't entirely Evelyn's doing, I began carefully. Dad made his own choices. He allowed our traditions to fade, prioritized new family events over long-standing commitments with me, and often dismissed my feelings when I tried to express them. Dad flinched visibly at these truths. but did not interrupt. However, I continued, turning to Evelyn. You intentionally accelerated that distance and created scenarios that forced choices where none should have been necessary. You positioned your children as competitors for Dad's attention, rather than additional members of his family that included me. Addressing the teenagers directly, I added, "None of this was your fault. Adults are responsible for the family dynamics they create. You were responding to guidance from your mother, which is natural and appropriate." Turning back to Dad, I delivered the hardest truth. You failed to protect our relationship. Whether you were manipulated or simply distracted by your new family, you allowed a lifetime bond to be systematically dismantled without intervention. That required your participation, willing or not. Dad's eyes filled with tears as he nodded in acknowledgement. "I failed you," he admitted simply. "In trying to be everything to my new family, I forgot that you were still my family too." I cannot blame Evelyn entirely for choices I made, even if I didn't fully understand the context. This acknowledgement, so long sought and never expected, unlocked something within me. The validation of my experience, the recognition of my pain, provided a foundation for potential healing that mere inclusion never could have. The dinner concluded without neat resolution. Evelyn remained defensive, though somewhat subdued by her children's unwillingness to leave. Dad appeared emotionally exhausted but more present than he had been in years. The teenagers navigated their own complex reactions to revelations about family dynamics they had participated in without fully understanding. As we prepared to depart, Dad asked if we could speak privately later that week. "There is much more to say," he acknowledged. "Things I should have recognized and addressed long ago." I agreed to meet him not with the desperate hope of earlier years, but with cautious openness to a relationship that might be rebuilt on honesty rather than obligation. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how walking away at Thanksgiving had ultimately created the conditions for truths to emerge that might otherwise have remained buried. Sometimes distance is necessary to gain perspective and absence required to recognize value. The confrontation had not magically resolved years of hurt, but it had cleared ground upon which something authentic might eventually grow. 1 year has passed since that revelatory dinner at Romano's. The calendar reads late spring, the season of renewal and growth, aptly symbolic of the transformed relationship I now share with my father, and by extension, his blended family. The journey from invisibility to valued presence has been neither linear nor simple. But standing on this side of that difficult year, I can finally see the painful pathway as necessary for genuine healing. Dad and I established a weekly breakfast ritual following our confrontation meeting at a neutral diner halfway between our homes every Saturday morning. Those early conversations were uncomfortable, raw, with honesty that had been absent for years. "I convinced myself that because you were an adult, you no longer needed me as a father," he admitted during one particularly emotional discussion. The truth was that being needed by Evelyn's children was easier than navigating a mature relationship with you. Those breakfasts became the foundation for rebuilding one difficult conversation at a time. We excavated years of accumulated hurts, examined patterns of avoidance, and gradually established new understanding. Dad learned to listen without defensiveness. I practiced expressing pain without accusation. We both abandoned the pretense that family relationships could thrive without intentional maintenance. The business partnership evolved alongside our personal reconnection. Rather than stepping back as originally planned, I accepted Dad's offer to become a formal partner in the construction company, bringing my marketing expertise permanently into the family business. My office sits directly across from his, a physical manifestation of our equal standing in this enterprise we now truly share. "We should have done this years ago," Dad remarked last month after we secured the largest contract in company history. "Your perspective complements mine perfectly." This acknowledgement of complementary strengths rather than competitive value represented profound growth in how he viewed my place in his life. Relationships with my step-siblings developed organically, once freed from Evelyn's orchestration. Amanda, now in her first year studying photography at university, frequently consults me about portfolio development and career strategies. Tyler seeks my advice on business concepts, his entrepreneurial interests aligning naturally with my expertise. Even Bailey, initially, the most distant now, stops by my office after school, occasionally sharing artistic creations and seeking feedback. These connections are neither forced nor obligatory but authentic expressions of shared interests and mutual respect. The competitive dynamic, carefully cultivated by Evelyn, has dissolved, allowing relationships to form based on genuine affinity rather than manufactured rivalry. Evelyn herself represented the most complex challenge in this family reconfiguration. The confrontation at Romano's forced a reckoning she initially resisted. For several weeks following that dinner, she maintained defensive distance, positioning herself as victim of unreasonable accusations. Dad, to his credit, refused to accept this framing, insisting on accountability for her deliberate campaign to marginalize me. Their marriage faced serious turbulence during this period. Dad later shared they had entered couples counseling, where Evelyn eventually acknowledged her insecurity-driven behavior. She admitted she felt threatened by our history, this whole life I had before her that she could never fully enter. Dad explained. Rather than finding ways to connect with my past, she tried to sever it entirely. Gradually, Evelyn and I established a cautious, respectful coexistence. We will never share the warm bond she had hoped to create with a stepson, but we have developed a civil relationship based on mutual commitment to Dad's happiness. Last Christmas, she privately apologized for her role in my exclusion, an olive branch I accepted with appropriate boundaries still in place. Family gatherings now follow new protocols that respect everyone's need for belonging. Holiday meals feature a single table where all generations sit together. Family photographs include various configurations always, with options that incorporate every family member. The lake house, once the site of my most painful exclusion, has been thoughtfully redesigned with input from everyone, including a dedicated space for my visits. Most significantly, last Thanksgiving marked a full-circle moment when Dad stood to offer his annual toast. To my family, he began his gaze deliberately, including everyone at the table, both those I have had the privilege of raising from birth. He nodded toward me. And those who blessed my life later, he acknowledged Evelyn and her children. I am grateful for second chances and the opportunity to love fully without false choices or divisions. Beyond family reconciliation, this year brought personal growth I could never have anticipated when I walked away that Thanksgiving night. The painful experience of replacement and exclusion led me to examine my own patterns of seeking validation and approval. Through continued therapy, I developed stronger internal anchoring that no longer requires constant external confirmation of my worth. This newfound self-sufficiency created space for romantic relationship growth as well. 6 months ago, I began dating Cassandra, a landscape architect I met through a client project. Unlike previous relationships where I often settled for less attention than I deserved with Cassandra, I maintain healthy expectations of mutual priority and respect. When I recently introduced her to Dad, his warm welcome came without the comparative assessment that once characterized his response to important people in my life. The family business has flourished under our combined leadership, Dad's construction expertise pairing effectively with my marketing and client development skills. We recently expanded operations to neighboring counties, a growth strategy I developed and Dad enthusiastically supported. Our professional respect reinforces our personal reconnection, each sphere strengthening the other. Perhaps most profound among the lessons this journey has taught me is the power of walking away when necessary. By removing myself from a situation where I was undervalued, I created the conditions that ultimately led to genuine recognition. Had I continued accommodating my gradual erasure from the family narrative, accepting smaller and smaller spaces at the table, both literally and figuratively, nothing would have changed. Walking away was not manipulation or punishment, but self-preservation that eventually benefited everyone involved. My absence forced recognition of my value in ways my diminished presence never could. The painful void I left by stepping back ultimately created space for something healthier to grow. I have learned that true family connections cannot be sustained through obligation alone. Relationships require mutual investment, honest communication, and willingness to acknowledge harm, even when unintentionally caused. The family we have now, imperfect but authentic, exists because painful truths were finally spoken and heard. Dad summarized this transformation powerfully during our most recent Saturday breakfast. I thought I could simply add Evelyn and her children to my life without making space, he reflected. I ended up pushing you aside instead of expanding the circle. What I understand now is that love multiplies when properly nurtured but divides when treated as a limited resource. That wisdom continues to guide our evolving family dynamic. We are not the seamlessly blended unit Evelyn initially envisioned, nor the exclusive father-son team Dad and I once were. Instead, we have become something more complex and ultimately more resilient. A family that has confronted its fractures and committed to healing them with honesty rather than pretense. To those of you watching who recognize your own family struggles in my story, I offer this hard-earned wisdom. Sometimes, walking away is the only path to being truly seen. Setting boundaries is not abandonment, but an act of self-respect that can ultimately lead to deeper connection. And family, whether bound by blood or choice, requires constant tending, like any living thing worth nurturing. Have you ever had to step away from someone you love to protect yourself? Did it lead to positive change or permanent separation? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of family reconciliation. Thank you for witnessing my story, and may you find the courage to protect your worth while remaining open to genuine healing in your own relationships.